Yo, what's up, kids? I'm back. Going to go through The Great Gatsby. The notes I got. I'm not going to go through the whole book, but I'm going to go through a few parts of it. I did finish the book, but this one focuses a little bit on an earlier part of the book, mainly when our main character here, Nick, goes over to his cousin's house and hangs out with her and her husband and one of their friends. But there's little bits from other parts of the book as well. So I'm going to put my crooked glasses on and I'm going to go through my notes a little bit. So I spoke a little bit about The Great Gatsby in episode 5. Where I left off was when Nick and Miss Jordan Baker were at Gatsby's party, and they had kind of broke off to go looking for him. And so they were kind of snooping around in his library, and they were sort of looking around for him, and they saw this guy, this drunk dude, sitting on a table in the library. And when I first read it the first time through, Gatsby had not yet been introduced, and so at this point Nick and I think even Miss Baker didn't know yet what he looked like, and so they were kind of looking around for him. And so they saw this guy sitting on the table in the library. And Gatsby had not been introduced, and I thought that this guy might have been him. And I think the reader is supposed to think that it might be him. And in my earlier episode, I made reference to the Batman movie where Vicky Vale and Alexander are secretly touring Bruce Wayne's private gallery, and he unexpectedly shows up behind them. So it kind of evoked the same image. It turns out here, the drunk guy on the table is not Gatsby, but rather this kind of weird guest who makes a scene a little bit later in the night here on the way out of the party, and then he shows up unexpectedly at the end of the book. My AC just kicked on and it's making a bunch of noise. I'm going to shut it off. Alright. Sorry about that. So presently, this drunken guest marvels over the fact that the books in the library are actually real and not merely props to make Gatsby seem intellectual. So all these people speak rumors about Gatsby, and although some of them may be true, it doesn't stop all these people from coming out to his soirees. It just demonstrates how, in this time and place, the sort of era of the Vanderbilts, inclusion in the elite class is paramount to one's popularity. There were even rumors that he had killed people because he was in the war. Didn't stop people from showing up. And we come to find out later how much these people cared about him. Spoiler alert. After he dies. Not counting, of course, this enigmatic drunken guest, whom we will see later, turns out to be one of just a handful of people at Gatsby's burial. So again, presently, this drunken guest goes over to the bookshelf and pulls a book at random, which turns out to be Volume 1 of Stoddard's lectures. And reference was made to this Stoddard earlier in the book, in the scene where our protagonist Nick goes over to his cousin Daisy's house for dinner with her husband Tom, and where he meets Jordan Baker for the first time. So, in conversation, Tom brings up Stoddard and how it is important to read his book. Actually, he doesn't call him Stoddard in this case. So the book that this drunken guy pulls off the shelf, it designates it as by Stoddard. But Tom, during the dinner, mentions a fictional author named Goddard, okay, who represents the actual author, Lothrop Stoddard. Kind of confusing. Who is named correctly by the drunk guest in Gatsby's library. Now, Lothrop Stoddard wrote a book called The Rising Tide of Color Against White Supremacy, which describes a paradigm shift in racial demographics as it affects Western civilization. So, why the change in this author's name from Stoddard to Goddard? And then keeping the name Stoddard later in the story in reference to another book. Perhaps F. Scott Fitzgerald, maybe he didn't want to get sued by, I don't know if this author was still alive at the time, but maybe his estate. Because the book is used in more of a pejorative sense, okay, when Tom brings it up. Also, I think this was used as a literary device to illustrate the bigoted nature of Tom Buchanan, who named a book with a slightly different, more pejorative title that indicated something along the lines of the Great Replacement theory. So he was going off during dinner about how they needed to be vigilant of this movement and to take pride in their race and so on. The ladies sort of insincerely nodded along, which sort of showed how Tom, with all of his money, was immune to the sort of social pressures which might dissuade one from indulging these kinds of subjects for a polite dinner conversation. Although it was probably a prevalent sentiment at the time, it also shows the author's disdain for such behavior, in addition to his possible disapproval of Stoddard's subject matter. These fields of study have long been frowned upon by the progressive elite. Books like The Bell Curve and Carlton S. Kuhn. One main takeaway I had from The Great Gatsby is just how money and power tend to corrupt the individual, separating them from the travails of ordinary humans and leading them into debauchery. And this is accomplished in the reflection of this main character, Nick, who is one of the few characters in the story who isn't rich. Yet, although Nick acknowledges the debauchery of his fellow characters, he suspends his judgment in action by allowing his relationships with these people to play out, instead of shunning them for their contemptible qualities. He does his best to do his part to show kindness despite their indiscretions, especially of Daisy and Gatsby. But he does eventually show his disdain for Tom and his disinterest in Jordan. So this character, this Nick Carraway from Illinois, who had graduated in 1915 and served in World War I. Afterwards, he moved to Long Island to study finance in 1922. And this is where the story begins. In a wealthy neighborhood on a Long Island peninsula called West Egg, where he lives in a ramshackle bungalow next door to Gatsby's mansion, and across the Sound from the nearly identical East Egg Peninsula, where Tom and Daisy live. with her 3-year-old daughter, whom we never see or hear from through the entire book. So I think this is done on purpose because these people are all so self-absorbed, you don't even get to meet their daughter. Am I going to repeat myself? This, to me, is indicative of the self-absorption of her parents, who keep her sort of out of sight and out of the way the entire time, like through the entire book. So the story really begins with the aforementioned dinner at Tom and Daisy's home. Nick is new to the neighborhood and hadn't seen Daisy since they were in Chicago right after the war. He had gone to college with Tom, her husband, who was a sort of local football legend, whose real glory days were behind him, but still had a position and a significant portion of his family wealth with which to navigate the turgid waters of local middling aristocracy, dragging with him a sort of culture-shocked wife who had never earned anything in her life and was granted privilege the whole way through, thus plunging her into a kind of helplessness regarding his indiscretions, extramarital affairs, and boisterousness. All the same, she did her best to go along for the ride and participate in and enable his extravagances with an affected gaiety. There's even a mild suggestion that Miss Baker is kind of thrown into the fun, if you know what I mean. There is an uncanny openness between her and the Buchanans. Now, this isn't explicitly stated in the story. I just kind of get the feeling. Like, when you read the book, there's this kind of ease between them where you're thinking, are these people all fucking each other? And, you know, whatever behind the scenes of a fictional story, well, we can all just use our imagination. In the 10-year interim since Nick had seen Tom, a worsening of Tom's personality could certainly be detected. But Nick was in no position to point it out. There was no getting through to a guy like that. He didn't have anybody keeping his attitude in check. He was just a dick. Talking about Tom now, not Nick. So they're having their little dinner get-together. And they first meet in the living room where Nick sort of meets Jordan Baker for the first time. He's not really formally introduced. She's kind of a skinny, young, attractive debutante who acts a little too cool. Not really regarding him much, just sort of blending in with the furniture at first. With her head held high and her chin up, you know, just a snotty little nose just sitting there. It turns out she's a professional golfer whom Nick had previously spotted in a newspaper. At one point she mentions Gatsby, the proprietor of the estate next door to Nick's bungalow. Nick lives in the only rundown little dwelling in the area. It's almost like, it looks like, it's like a little, like almost like a gardener's shack, you know, or like slave quarters or something. He's surrounded by rich folk, and his experiences over the next several months inform him of how rotten and out of touch most of these people really are. So presently, dinner is announced, and they adjourn to the porch. Daisy is hospitable and conscientious, paying special attention to Nick. Tom is just sort of his asshole self, and Jordan is aloof. The conversation consists of a series of superficial tidbits, and without Daisy, Nick would have been totally out of place and probably ignored. So a phone call comes in for Tom, answered by the butler, and before long, Daisy leaves the table and can be heard in the other room making a bit of a fuss. Jordan leans in to inform Nick that it is Tom's mistress who's on the phone, and is eager to share the gossip with a man whom she had basically just been ignoring up until that point, and whom she had just met. After Daisy returns, apparently ruffled at first, she quickly changes moods as she herself shares a bit of gossip, this time about the butler, who had just answered the phone minutes before, So she's basically talking shit about somebody who is there in the social situation. I've always kind of hated that. Like, have you ever been out with like family, and they're like just talking shit about somebody in the room, and like other people at other tables can hear them, and you're kind of like guilty by association just sitting there with them? It's kind of embarrassing. I've never liked that. So this butler that Daisy's talking about, who answered the phone just minutes before, he had just recently suffered some family misfortune, and Daisy was kind of making light of it, sort of gossiping about him. And at this point, Tom is still on the phone. And despite her accommodating gestures towards Nick, Daisy reveals a bit of pettiness in her own character that has maybe rubbed off from the company she'd been keeping as of late. She's been hanging out with these rich assholes, so it's kind of rubbing off on her a little bit. She's kind of becoming petty in her own way. Nick continued to act charmed by her. Perhaps her intentions are pure. Jordan is presumed to be kind of hot, but probably a bit of a bitch. Like, her shit doesn't stink. She's not overtly rude, but not entirely pleasant either. Just a brisk composure that betrays a social craftiness. She's mildly interested in Nick, but doesn't really show it. Now, many of these impressions are subtle and subjective. Perhaps the genius of F. Scott Fitzgerald is his ability to elicit different impressions from people of disparate social strata. Like maybe a rich person reading the book would think that Nick is just sort of an unrefined dork and all the rest of them are normal, or a feminist might look at Jordan Baker and think of her as a strong woman, where Daisy is just maybe kind of a wannabe. Like the good guys and the bad guys are reversed. And it's not that any of them are explicitly bad guys, except for maybe Tom. Gatsby is hopelessly rotten as well, which we'll find out later. Most of the characters are rather nuanced, and even Nick earned my contempt a few times in the course of the story. Like, why is this guy such a pushover? Why does he enable the bad behavior of all these other people? Why doesn't he stand up to Tom or tell Gatsby he's an asshole? But by the end of the book, Daisy, Nick's cousin, turns out to be the biggest piece of shit out of all of them. She winds up hitting Tom's mistress, Myrtle, with Gatsby's car and killing her. Spoiler alert. Gatsby winds up taking the blame, and Daisy is never held accountable for it. Gatsby probably would have gotten arrested, but gets killed by Myrtle's husband before that can happen. And that's at the end of the book. And Tom is none the wiser. So Tom never finds out that his wife was driving Gatsby's car and hit and ran. So no accountability for Daisy. That's probably the most aggravating detail of the story to me, is that she gets away with it. To our feminist reader, it's probably Tom punching Myrtle in the nose and getting away with it. That's probably the most aggravating detail for them. To me, the biggest takeaway from the book is that rich people suck. So while Tom was on the phone with Myrtle, his mistress, Daisy went into the house, and Miss Baker hushed up so she could eavesdrop on the situation. She told Nick about the affair. Soon after, Tom and Daisy return to the table and move on from the moment. Tom and Jordan stroll back to the library together, and Nick goes with Daisy to the front porch. The young daughter makes no appearance, and even when Nick asks about her, Daisy deflects the question. She speaks of her own unhappiness. She does manage to say, however, that when her daughter was born, she cried when she found out it was a girl. That Tom was nowhere to be found at the time, and that she hoped her daughter would turn out to be a, quote, beautiful little fool, and that that's the best thing a girl can be in this world. So she expressed cynicism about her role in this higher society she was now tethered to. They soon joined Tom and Jordan in the library, where she was reading to him an article from the Saturday Evening Post. Nick remembers then where he recognizes Jordan from, and that she was involved in some scandal, but couldn't remember what it was. Jordan excuses herself to go to bed. Yeah, so she has a place to go to bed in the Buchanan's house. So just a second ago, I talked about how Nick remembers where he recognizes Jordan from. So he had seen her, like she looked familiar when he first entered the room and saw her. And it turns out that she was a professional golfer, and that he had seen her like on an advertisement in a magazine or in a newspaper. So yeah, so she's got a place to go to bed in the Buchanan's house. So apparently she feels very at home there. So I think they're definitely pulling a three-way. But like I said, that's never explicitly mentioned. Apparently she had a golf tournament the following day and she needed to get some rest. So Daisy makes a quip that she's going to hook her and Nick up together. Of course, Nick doesn't take any of this seriously. That would have been like wishful thinking. Like your cousin's going to get you laid kind of thing. Yeah, right. With your friend. We'll see about that. Tom briefly brought up the Nordic race subject again, but it was deflected. He advised, "Don't believe everything you hear, Nick." Nick got the impression Tom was allowing himself to get depressed over this book. That somehow he was attempting to compensate for a lackluster, self-important egotism by entertaining stale ideas. Daisy asked about a rumor she had heard about Nick being engaged. He insisted it was false. He drove home that night somewhat confused and disgusted. And so, I'll end this one here. So yeah, so that was just a really short episode of The Great Gatsby. Originally I was going to do Brave New World, Great Gatsby, Practice and Theory of Bolshevism, and Capitalism and Freedom all in one episode. But my episodes were starting to get really long. I think the last one I had done before Brave New World was that episode 13. Was like 2.5 hours or something. And I don't want these to get too long. I've already gotten complaints from people that I did, send links to saying, "Dude, why are you talking so long? I can't listen to you jibber jabber for hours." But I mean, that's the kind of stuff I listen to. A lot of long form content. I don't listen to very much that's under an hour, because when I'm at work and I listen to stuff, I don't want to be fiddling with my phone a lot. So I like to listen to something that's long form. And for me, since I talk so freaking slow, because I think so freaking slow, it takes me a long time to say what I'm going to say, or kind of get my ideas together, especially when I'm going off the cuff. So I don't really mind doing long form stuff. I kind of like it. So the truth is these videos, as much as they're for you, they're also for me. I mean, I'm sort of building something here. Not to get too meta on the situation, but my first couple episodes, if you watch them, which, I mean, I don't necessarily recommend. They're pretty cringy. But starting out, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't even know what I was going to talk about. I didn't even know the next thing that was going to come out of my mouth. And as it turns out, these episodes became more about books. I think the first couple of episodes I talked about all kinds of stuff. I talked about music, what I was doing with my band, and like albums I was listening to. But listening back on that, I don't really want to talk about music, because it's kind of superficial. Talk about bands. You know, it's like, what are we, in high school? I found that like the bands I listen to and the music I like it becomes less and less important to my identity. You know, when you're a teenager, like, music is a really huge part of your identity. It's like I listen to Megadeth, dude, not Metallica. You know, like, Metallica sucks, dude. Megadeth's where it's at, dude. Dave Mustaine's cool. Lars sucks, dude. So like, all that garbage is just, I don't know, to me it's just really dumb now. And I don't know if I'm just like really mature, you know, or I'm really growing up, you know. I got my band t-shirt on, by the way. My band. Deep Dig. But, yeah, I mean, I just really don't have much to say about any of that stuff. It's all just memes on the internet now. And I do enjoy talking about books, because it's something that to me is useful. Because most people, let's face it, most people don't read. Most people don't read as much as I do. Nobody reads as much as my brother does. So one thing that I would say that of his life work, I would say that his reading, and besides his family, but his reading is a huge portion of his life's work, because he has invested a lot of his time into reading, and that's good. I'm glad he did. Like when we were kids, I remember one of the things I remember about my brother. When he was 9 years old, he was like toting around this copy of The Sword of Shannara. It's like this fantasy series. And this freaking book is like, it's a ridiculous, it's like 1,000 freaking pages, something like, or more. And he read it when he was like 9 years old. And I remember him carrying it around, and we were living in Germany, and we were walking around downtown in like, I don't know, Rothenburg or something, and he's carrying this book around. And I remember he walked over to this like manhole on the street, and like was marveling that the book was so thick he couldn't fit it between the grates on the manhole cover. It was like a grated manhole cover. It was like a grill, and he couldn't fit the book between the grates, and like that was remarkable to him. Probably because he was 9 years old and reading this book, and it was, I mean, it's just something you never see as a kid that age reading a book like that. I mean, granted, it was fantasy, but it was just an enormous book. And I don't think I've ever seen a 9-year-old read a 1,000-page book. But I mean, that was my brother. I mean, he read that much, and like he, you know, just had a love for reading at a really young age, and he subscribed to this he joined the science fiction book club. And so he would get these catalogs with all these books, and he would order tons of books. I just remember these boxes of books coming to our house. And he would have like Asimov's Foundation series in there, and like Lord Fowl's Bane, like Stephen R. Donaldson books, and other, Conan, just everything. The Mists of Avalon, Elric saga, whatever. I never got into that genre of literature, honestly. I did download some PDFs of some of the Conan stuff, and I read a little bit of it. I kind of wanted to just read the novelization of the movie Conan the Barbarian, just to kind of get a little bit of it. But yeah, I don't know. It's just not my thing. I'm not really into swords and dragons and barbarians chopping people up. Not that I'm against chopping people up, but like if I'm gonna read that, I'll read about some like Colombian drug cartel or something. But one book that I had gotten from the library and I started reading was Che Guevara's biography, and I didn't get very far in it, but I kind of want to read that. I've been reading a ton of other stuff. What I've been reading? I've been reading through the Constitution and the Declaration and like everything leading up to it, because there's this signet paperback that has the Declaration and the Constitution, and it gives a lot of the backstory and talks about the Constitutional Convention and how the Declaration came about and what documents it drew from, and sort of some of the inner drama of the delegates who spent this very sort of musty summer, like in these rooms together, probably stinking up the place, deliberating over all these issues that were going to be in the Declaration and the Constitution. And they were framing the future of the country, and not only everybody who was alive at the time, but everybody who was to come after that. And so a lot was on their shoulders there. And that's a pretty interesting read. And I've been reading a lot about... I started reading this book called the Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, which mostly in the in the earlier part of the book, it mainly just talks about communism. It talks about Lenin. It talks about Marx and Lenin and Stalin, and the whole movement leading up to the revolution and the communist regime and everything. And it's pretty interesting. It refers to Anthony Sutton's book where Anthony Sutton talks about how those revolutions had backing from from Wall Street and some of the international banks. So that's interesting, and that he also wrote other books where he talks about how they not only financed the Bolshevik Revolution, but they also financed the Nazis, the rise of the Nazi Party. And so, crazy stuff there. I mean, I talk about some of this stuff, and I remember some guy told me that he's all, "Oh, dude, how's that tinfoil hat fitting you?" or something like that. Something stupid. And I just told him, I said, I'd rather wear a hat made out of tinfoil than a hat made out of my own asshole. He didn't like that very much. But yeah, I try to stay off of social media. There's certain things that, I guess are good topics to open up with people on social media, and then some that are probably best avoided, because I always figure if someone's posting some real controversial, like, political thing, it's almost like, especially if it's something stupid, I almost feel like I have to respond. Of course I don't, but what else? What else have I been reading? I got this. Oh, speaking of the Fabians, because I talked about the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. So I got this other book that is like the history, it's more It's kind of a history. It starts out as a history. It's about Fabian socialism, and it's called like Fabian socialism and English politics. From the years 1889 through 1914, something like that. And in the early part of the book, it gives the history of the Fabian Society and how it came about. And it's kind of crazy how it came about, because the Fabian Society started out as like this sort of Protestant cult. And there were some socialists in the group who sort of like contentious forked the cult and made their own group called the Fabian Society. And then they had all these rivalries with other socialist groups, because I guess the Fabians were in those days where they weren't like they weren't big enough assholes, I guess. Like they were some of them were pretty radical, but I guess they weren't contentious enough for some of the other groups, because the socialist groups can get really contentious. And they go from anything from like where the Fabians were, where the whole Fabian agenda was to be very incremental, and it was sort of a slow kill. And so they were going to try to bring socialism into the mainstream incrementally. And the other groups were very much more radical and very much in your face and just wanted everything now. And they're just, they're hammering it. So like they had a lot of contention with these other groups. And then one of the other groups got caught like funneling money through Parliament or whatever, and supporting the opposition, supporting the Tories, and so they were kind of ousted. That was the something Labor Federation. I forgot what it was called. Socialist Labor Fed. No, it was a social. It was SDF, wasn't it? Social Democrat Federation or something. And then there was another group that sort of branched off from that one, and they became like the new sort of rivals to the Fabian Society. And so, I don't know, it's not that interesting at this point. I just kind of wanted to learn about it. What else have I been reading? Okay, so my next 2 episodes are going to be, I need to do Bertrand Russell's Practice and Theory of Bolshevism, and I think I'm going to tie Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman into it, and that's going to be part 2 of that, because I've already done the introduction to that. And so I want to tie those 2 together, because when I talk about the Practice and Theory of Bolshevism, that's a movement I'm very much, that I've always been very much against, so like as an ideology. And so I'm pretty negative on that one. And what I want to do is contrast capitalism and freedom with it, to show the difference of the spirit of those 2 movements, to show that how capitalism is really about freedom and prosperity, and bringing about the happiness of the individual, and it the sort of rising tide that raises all ships, as opposed to this Bolshevik system, which is just ultimately destructive and authoritarian and just evil. And Bertrand Russell himself, he sympathizes with the Bolsheviks. He thought that they were great, but the Russians were just doing it wrong. So like the thing is, he likes the idea of socialism. He doesn't like the reality that it brings about, because all socialist movements end in authoritarianism. They all do. And they all result in the exaltation of violence, and all of them, as far as I've seen, ultimately become fascist at some point. As much as that's an unpopular opinion, in my view, all leftist movements that I've seen result in fascism. But, I've been studying these things, and so that is a conclusion that I've arrived at. Who knows? Maybe I'll change my mind one day, but not yet. Hasn't happened yet. And so what else? What else have I been reading? Can't remember what else I've been reading. I read a little bit of the Communist Manifesto. I'm kind of looking down at some of these other... a little bit, just the very beginning, just the tip of Niall Ferguson's biography on Henry Kissinger. And I'm getting ready to, like, once I get paid again, I'm going to order Diplomacy, which I have on a PDF form. I hate reading those PDFs though, man. Oh, one thing I've been reading is that Millennium book, The Glimpses of the 21st Century. This book's really rare. I mean, to buy it costs like $300, but I found it on. I don't want to say the name of the website because you have to check it out. Like, it's a library. You actually check out the PDF, and it lets you have it for like 14 days. And I'm not sure if other people can check it out at the same time. Possibly, but I don't want it to become unavailable to me if I tell anybody. I don't even know if anybody's watching this, but kind of like what I was saying before. I mean, these videos are really for me. They're not. I mean, I'm publishing them for public consumption, but not a lot of people watch them, and I don't really expect people to watch them. I'm not trying to like build a brand here. This is all for my own development and my own enrichment to do this. Like, my friend Rob told me that my first episode, he's like, dude, you look really scared on there. And I was like, yeah, I was. It's a scary thing I'm doing here. Like, it's nerve-wracking, like, to start. I mean, like, I feel better about it now. I don't get a lot of practice. If I was doing this every day, I think I'd be really good at it. And that's the goal, is to try to get better at it. And I'm trying to improve my public speaking. I mean, that's kind of why I got into it. I took a public speaking class in college, and I thought it was really fun. And I was very, very nervous in class to speak in front of the class. I was petrified. I remember when I was in algebra, every time the teacher would call me up to do a problem on the board, like an algebra equation or something, I swear I almost pissed my pants every time. It scared the fuck out of me. And with this, when I did my first one, I didn't know what I was going to talk about. Yeah, it was pretty frightening. You can go back and watch it, man. I mean, it's cringy, but I mean, it's still cringy. That hasn't changed. It's just a different flavor of cringe. But yeah, my friend, he was like, dude, you look scared. And I was like, well, dude, try it sometime. It's a scary thing. It's a scary thing that's going on here. I'm talking, and a lot of people can hear it. Like, I think probably the consensus on that has changed over the years because people are a little bit more narcissistic now. But there was a time where I remember a majority of people thought they feared more than death. They feared speaking in front of people. Yeah. But it's different when you're speaking in front of a live audience as well, because you get the feedback. And if people aren't appreciating what you're doing, like, for all I know, every single person that watches this can think it's horrible. And if I was doing it live, I would know that. But since I'm doing it in here, it's just more like I'm talking to myself. And I could talk to myself all day. Like, I like me. But you never know how other people are going to respond to you. And, if it picks up traction, then, there'll be some words in the comments section. Joe Rogan always says never read the comments. I would have a hard time not reading the comments if someone was commenting. I think most podcasters and most people who post content, they read the comments. And I've gotten a lot of responses from the people I listen to. I listen to Jason Burmis a lot, and I've commented on his videos, and he's commented back. I've gotten responses from Tristan Haggard. I've gotten responses from the crypto guys. Charlie Miguel. I've gotten responses from Jay Dyer. So it's kind of cool in a way, like to have those people answer you because, you know, it's like you're affecting them in a way, I guess. You know, it's kind of childish, but um, it's kind of neat when they respond to you. You're like, wow, man, it's like a famous person. But they're really not. I don't really think they're. I mean, with Jay Dyer, his career is kind of taken off. Does the he does Lord Voldemort's show, and it. I mean, that's a lot of exposure. That's huge. Jason Burmis made the Loose Change documentary, which was viewed by a lot of people, but he doesn't get a lot of viewership. I think a lot of these guys they're sort of throttled by YouTube, and I don't know to what extent my stuff's throttled. I don't know why anybody would watch it anyway. I don't even know like what the point would be of throttling a video like this, because I mean it's I would post these things private, except that I would just feel like I'm wasting my time if I did that. Like, if I'm going to talk about books, I might as well make it available for other people who are too lazy to read. And nothing against anybody here. If you're too lazy to read, you're too lazy to read. It's okay. Like, go make dinner for your kids. It's fine. I'll do the reading and I'll talk about it, and you can listen to what I have to say about the books. And maybe it'll spark your interest, and then you'll go read the book yourself, and you'll go, that guy didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. Because a lot of the time, I'm giving my interpretation of these books. I read a book on fascism, and then I decide for myself that, you know, all leftist movements tend towards fascism. Probably 80% of the people would not come to that conclusion, but that's a conclusion I've come to, so I talk about it. And I'm not, you know, ashamed to say what I think in terms of ideas I have that might be unpopular. Like, I'm okay with that. I mean, I've had unpopular views my entire life. Like, I'm not going to stop now. I'm almost 50 years old. Whew, can't believe I just said that. I'm not almost 50. I've got more than 2 years before I turn 50. Okay? And this hair is not getting any better. It's not getting any blacker. It's not getting any thicker. Not unless my cryptos take off and I get some hair transplants. But I don't even think I would do that, because I don't like the idea of, like, modification. I don't like the idea of, like, trying to hold on to your youth. I mean, to me, it sort of betrays your insecurity. And I figured, this is why I'm going to say something about balding, okay, because I'm going bald, and I'm fine with it, okay? I don't necessarily like it. I mean, I would love it if I had all my hair. I'm not happy about it, but I'm not going to try and stop it, and I'm not going to try and hide it, okay? Now, everybody says, well, if you're going bald, dude, just shave your whole head, dude, just bick it, and then, you know, it's like, well, aren't you hiding it when you do that? I mean, like, people can't see the 5 o'clock shadow of your toilet seat freaking hairline coming back. Like, you're not fooling anybody. And as soon as you try to hide it, everybody's got something on you, okay? But when you're like me and you're going bald and you just show it, like, nobody cares. Like, when you go to a bus stop and you see some boomer show up and he's balding, do you care? Like, does anybody freaking care? You see a bald guy at the bus stop, are you going, oh, he's bald? Nobody fucking cares. The only people who care are people who used to know you, who knew you when you had hair, and they haven't seen you in 15 years, and all of a sudden, oh, he's kind of going bald now. But it's not like anything unexpected. It's like, well, he is almost 50 years old, you know? So there's no shame in going bald. And it's like, yeah, of course you're not going to get laid as much, but whatever, who cares? I got so much of that out of the way when I was younger. I don't really feel the need to keep doing it. Like, I was slaying back in the day, so I'm fine, you know. Like, I haven't missed any opportunities. I don't feel, you know, maybe in the last 10 years I have, but before that I was slaying, so I'm not worried about it. I've had more than my share. I've had my share plus other people's share, you know. And so I'm totally okay with that. I'm just gonna go bald, and I'm gonna get old, and you know, I'm not really in as good a shape as I used to be. But I try to stretch before I go to work, you know, try to stretch my joints. Ever since I got the stabby, my joints feel like they're deteriorating, and my hand and my forearms, they seize up on me. And when I sleep, my hands go numb and they curl up like baby hands, and I have to pry them open in the morning. It's terrible. And those were the side effects of the stabby. And the first day I got the stabby, I had sore joints for like 4 days, 5 days, and it never went away. And 2.5 years later, it's just gotten worse. So there's a lot of people that go, oh, dude, it's just because you're getting old, dude. It doesn't have anything to do with that. I never heard about anybody else getting that. And it's like, well, that would be uncanny timing if that was the case. And I don't think that's the case. I think that the case is that those things, are poison, and they've poisoned people, and I'm one of those people. And so I'm never again. I'm not doing it again after that. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to close it up. I will see you next time. Okay, so yeah, the next one I'm going to do is Bolshevik Revolution. Or, no. Sorry. Practice and Theory of Bolshevism, backed with. So that's going to be side A in the same episode. I'm going to do Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman, part 2.